Watch the shocking testimony of a devout Muslim who discovered the terrifying truth during his near-death experience. What he saw in the spiritual realm shattered everything he believed about Islam and changed his life forever. I lived in a modest two-story house in Mississauga, Ontario, with my wife Fatima and our 3 children. At 52, I was content with my life as a respected member of our local mosque, where I served as a volunteer Islamic studies teacher. My name is Karim Abbasi, and I spent 4 decades believing I knew the truth about Allah. That belief shattered one winter morning during my drive to work. I was a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing plant, and the roads were especially treacherous that day. Black ice covered most surfaces, making even the simplest commute dangerous. I remember checking my rearview mirror and seeing my prayer beads hanging there, swaying gently. I had just finished my morning prayer, feeling that familiar sense of righteousness that came with following the 5 pillars of Islam. The accident happened so fast. A truck carrying steel beams lost control on the overpass above. I saw the beams break loose from their restraints, almost floating in slow motion. One beam crashed through my windshield, missing my head by inches, but crushing the passenger side of my car. The impact sent my vehicle spinning across 3 lanes. More beams rained down, and my car plunged through the guardrail. Time seemed to stop as my Toyota Camry flew off the elevated highway. In those precious seconds, I thought about my life, my family, and most importantly, my faith. I had dedicated myself to Islam since childhood. 5 times a day, I faced Mecca and prostrated myself before Allah. I memorized large portions of the Quran, gave zakat faithfully, and completed the Hajj twice. I even convinced several people to convert to Islam, believing I was saving their souls. The car hit the ground below with devastating force. Metal crunched and glass shattered. The airbag exploded in my face, but it wasn't enough to prevent my head from smashing into the steering wheel. My chest crushed against the seatbelt, and I felt several ribs crack. The steel beam that had penetrated my car shifted forward, pinning my legs to the floor. I don't remember if I screamed. The pain was beyond anything I had ever experienced. Blood filled my mouth, and I could barely breathe. My last conscious thought was the Islamic declaration of faith, the Shahada. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. I had recited these words countless times, believing they would guarantee my entrance into paradise. Emergency crews worked for over an hour to extract me from the wreckage. Later, I learned that several witnesses called 911, certain they had just watched someone die. The paramedics told my family that my heart stopped 3 times during the rescue operation. My injuries were catastrophic: severe head trauma, multiple broken ribs, a punctured lung, internal bleeding, and crushed legs. As I lay dying in that mangled car, I had no idea that what awaited me on the other side would completely shatter my worldview. Everything I had believed about Allah, about Muhammad, about Islam, it was all about to be exposed as a lie. But at that moment, as my consciousness faded and death approached, I was still a devoted Muslim, expecting to see the Islamic paradise I had been promised. Little did I know that my real journey was just beginning. The truth I would discover during my near-death experience would force me to confront everything I had built my life upon, and nothing would ever be the same again. The moment my heart stopped for the 3rd time, everything changed. I felt myself suddenly floating above my broken body, watching the paramedics working frantically below. Their voices seemed distant and muffled, like I was hearing them through water. I could see every detail with perfect clarity: the twisted metal of my car, the blood-soaked airbag, and my own lifeless face, pale and still. I wasn't afraid. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace, completely different from the false tranquility I used to feel after Islamic prayers. This was real, pure, and absolute. The physical pain that had been crushing me moments before completely vanished. A tunnel of light appeared, but it wasn't like the stories I'd heard at the mosque about the Islamic barzakh, the barrier between earthly life and the afterlife. This light was alive, conscious, and filled with a love so intense it defied description. As I moved toward it, I became aware of a presence, ancient, powerful, and wholly beyond imagination. I expected to see Allah as I had imagined him, distant, demanding, ready to weigh my good deeds against my bad. I had spent my life trying to earn his approval through endless prayers, fasting, and rigid adherence to Sharia law. But what I encountered instead shook me to my core. The presence revealed itself, and I instantly knew I was in the presence of the one true God, but not the Allah of the Quran. This was nothing like the deity Muhammad had described. There was no stern judge demanding submission and threatening punishment. Instead, I encountered pure love and truth that exposed every lie I had believed. In that moment, all my Islamic teachings crumbled. I saw Muhammad for what he really was, not a prophet, but a man who had deceived millions. The Quran's descriptions of Allah suddenly felt hollow and false, like a child's attempt to describe the ocean without ever having seen it. The true God before me was infinitely greater, more loving, and more personal than anything Islam had taught me. Images began flooding my consciousness. I saw countless souls who had been led astray by Islamic teachings, believing they were following the true path but actually walking in darkness. I witnessed the spiritual reality behind the Islamic faith, a system of control built on fear and false promises. But I followed everything perfectly. I tried to protest, thinking of my decades of devotion. I prayed 5 times a day. I gave zakat. I completed the Hajj. I memorized the Quran. The divine presence responded not with words, but with pure truth that bypassed language. I understood that no amount of religious rituals or good works could bridge the gap between humanity and God. The Islamic concept of earning paradise through deeds was exposed as a hopeless endeavor. However, I was then shown a path, a narrow way, illuminated by the light of grace. I saw Jesus Christ, not merely as a prophet, but as the Son of God who had sacrificed himself for humanity's salvation. He extended his hand toward me, and in his eyes I saw the fulfillment of all righteousness. I realized that salvation comes through faith in Jesus Christ, but it doesn't end there. I was shown the importance of the sacraments, baptism, communion, and other sacred rites, as means of grace that nurture and sustain one's faith. These were not empty rituals, but vital practices instituted by Christ himself to unite believers with his body. Moreover, I understood that good works are not about earning salvation, but are the natural fruit of a genuine faith. Acts of love, charity, and compassion are responses to God's grace, not attempts to secure it. The sacraments and good works work together with faith, completing the circle of salvation. I saw my own life played back before me, but not in the way Islamic tradition had taught. Instead of angel scribes weighing my deeds, I saw how my devotion to Islam had actually separated me from true communion with God. Each time I had tried to earn divine favor through Islamic practices, I had moved further from the authentic relationship offered through Christ. The most devastating revelation was seeing how I had led others away from truth by teaching Islam. Each person I had helped convert now weighed heavily on my conscience. I had sincerely believed I was helping them, but I had actually guided them away from the sacraments and the path of true salvation. As these truths flooded my consciousness, I became aware of other presences around me. These weren't the angels as described in Islamic tradition. No Munkar and Nakir coming to question me in the grave. No Malik guarding the gates of hell. These beings radiated pure light and love, serving the one true God with joy rather than fearful submission. The divine presence continued revealing truth after truth. I saw how the Islamic concept of paradise, with its promises of physical pleasures and multiple wives, was a human invention that completely missed the profound reality of eternal communion with God. The true heaven I glimpsed was far more magnificent than anything described in the Quran, enriched by the sacraments and the fellowship of the saints. Most shocking was the revelation about Jesus. In Islam, we believed he was just a prophet, less important than Muhammad. But now I saw him in his true divine nature, one with the Father, exactly as Christians had always claimed. Every verse in the Quran that denied his divinity stood exposed as a lie. The presence showed me how Muhammad had twisted and distorted the truth about Jesus. I saw scenes from Muhammad's life that weren't recorded in any Islamic texts, moments of doubt when he knew he was inventing revelations, times when he used his claimed prophetic authority for personal gain. The contrast between Muhammad's life and Jesus' perfect sacrifice was stark and undeniable. Then came the hardest part. I was shown the reality of hell. It wasn't the Islamic description of physical torments, but something far worse: eternal separation from God's love and truth. I understood with terrible clarity that this was the destination for those who rejected the true path, neglected the sacraments, and ignored the call to good works. My heart broke as I saw countless Muslims sincerely performing their religious duties, believing they were earning salvation, while actually moving further from the truth with each ritual. The 5 pillars of Islam, which I had taught to so many others, were revealed as meaningless ceremonies that couldn't save anyone. Time seemed meaningless in this state. I could have been experiencing these revelations for minutes or millennia. It was impossible to tell. Each new truth deepened my understanding of how completely Islam had failed to grasp the nature of God and salvation. I learned that true salvation didn't come through performing religious duties or following rules. It wasn't about praying in a certain direction, fasting at certain times, or making pilgrimages to sacred sites. All of these things were human attempts to reach God through human effort, and all of them fell infinitely short. The presence showed me how the sacraments are divine gifts, means by which God imparts grace to believers. Baptism wasn't just a symbolic act, but a rebirth into new life. The Eucharist was not merely a ritual, but a real participation in the body and blood of Christ. These sacred practices were essential components of salvation, uniting faith and works in harmony. I saw the true purpose of life, not to submit to a distant deity through rigid rules and rituals, but to enter into a loving relationship with our Creator, nurtured through the sacraments and expressed in good works. Every Islamic teaching that portrayed God as a remote sovereign demanding blind obedience had missed this fundamental truth. The concept of divine unity in Islam, Tawheed, which I had studied and taught for years, was revealed as a simplified distortion that failed to grasp the deep mystery of God's nature. The Christian understanding of the Trinity, which I had previously rejected as polytheism, was shown to be a more accurate reflection of divine reality. Most painfully, I saw how my own family was trapped in Islamic deception. My children, whom I had raised to follow Muhammad's teachings, were walking a path that led away from truth. My wife, faithful in her hijab and prayers, was building her hope of salvation on a false foundation. The presence then showed me specific verses from the Quran that contained errors and contradictions, things I had always explained away or ignored. I saw how the Islamic description of the universe, the human body, and historical events contained mistakes that revealed their human origin. These weren't divine revelations, but reflections of 7th century understanding. The Islamic doctrine of abrogation, where later verses of the Quran canceled out earlier ones, was exposed as evidence of human authorship rather than divine wisdom. I saw how this concept had been used to justify increasingly harsh and controlling religious rules, moving people further from true spiritual understanding. Then came a series of visions about the spread of Islam through history. I saw how political power, military conquest, and fear had been the real forces behind its growth, not divine truth. The presence showed me how the religion had been used as a tool of control, binding people in spiritual darkness while claiming to guide them to light. I witnessed the true origin of Islamic practices. The 5 daily prayers, the Ramadan fast, even the Hajj pilgrimage. These weren't original divine commandments, but adapted from pre-existing Arabian pagan customs. Muhammad had incorporated these familiar rituals to make his new religion more acceptable to his followers. The Kaaba in Mecca was revealed in its true historical context, not a house built by Abraham as Islamic tradition claimed, but a pagan shrine that had been repurposed. The black stone that Muslims revere and kiss during Hajj was shown to be nothing more than an ancient pagan idol that had been incorporated into Islamic worship. My understanding of martyrdom was completely transformed. The Islamic concept of dying in jihad as the highest form of sacrifice was exposed as a terrible deception. I saw the souls of suicide bombers and fighters who had died believing they were serving Allah, only to discover too late that they had been tragically deceived. Throughout all these revelations, the presence never condemned or rejected me. Instead, I felt overwhelming love and compassion, even as each truth stripped away another layer of my Islamic beliefs. This was so different from the Allah I had known, a deity who demanded perfect obedience and threatened eternal punishment for the slightest deviation. I was shown how the sacraments serve as a bridge between humanity and God, instituted by Christ to bring us into communion with Him. The importance of good works became clear. They are not means to earn salvation, but are the evidence of a living faith, the natural response to God's grace. I was also shown how the Islamic teaching about predestination had twisted people's understanding of free will and moral responsibility. The idea that Allah had already decided everyone's eternal destination, yet still punished people for their predetermined choices, was revealed as a contradiction that defied both divine justice and love. The presence then revealed something that shook me deeply: the spiritual reality behind Islamic prayers. All those years of facing Mecca, prostrating myself, reciting Arabic phrases, I saw how these rituals had actually created a barrier between me and true communion with God. The formality and repetition had prevented genuine spiritual connection nurtured through the sacraments. Most disturbing was seeing how the Islamic teaching about women reflected human prejudice rather than divine wisdom. The rules about female submission, multiple wives, inheritance rights, and court testimony were shown to be products of a patriarchal culture, not divine commands. I saw how these teachings had caused immense harm and suffering throughout history. If this incredible journey of discovery touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to hear more amazing testimonies of people who found the truth. Your support helps us share these life-changing stories with others who need to hear them.